We are starting our meeting today with a study session, an overview of the finance department's updates to the purchasing policy. So, I think I'll turn it over to the city manager if you want to.
I'll do roll call first.
Oh yeah, roll call.
We're out of practice. Councilmember Jones? Here. Councilmember Kim?
Here.
Councilmember Whalen?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Orgill?
Here.
Mayor Renagi?
Here. Thank you for that reminder. 6 weeks, so it's been a while. Mr. City Manager, if you want to kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Here today are Michelle Bannigan, our finance director, and Christina Reyes, who's our purchasing consultant. They've both been working on this for a bit. We're proud to present it to you. This is, again, a study session, so we're welcoming your feedback. Our anticipation is this will come back in October for at least initial approval. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michelle or to Christina. Sorry. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Reyes, and I am the procurement consultant for the city. Is it not working? Oh, okay. That better? Okay. I'm going to be presenting today on the purchasing policy updates and explaining those in somewhat of detail. And if there's questions, I'll be available for answering those at the end. So let me just do this here. Okay, so I just want to start with the objectives. So the objectives of our policy updates would include bringing the policy up to date. The last update was performed in 2020. In addition to that, we want to ensure that the policy is in line and in compliance with the purchasing ordinance. We want to reduce ambiguity and provide city departments clear direction and guidance as they approach procurement. We want to promote fair, open competition. We want to maintain positive vendor relationships and monitor vendor performance and compliance standards. We also want to maintain public trust through transparency and responsible stewardship of public funds. Finally, we want to ensure compliance with federal, state, and local government laws related to purchasing. So the first thing I want to go over, I don't know why that screen is delayed. Oh, there goes. Okay, just took a second. So I want to go over the threshold changes. There are 4 levels that we categorize procurement. So level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. Level 1 has been changed from 5,000 to 10,000. So basically requests can be made up to 10,000, requiring 1 quote and do not require a PO. This is small dollar purchases. It used to be 5 and now it would be 10.
You'll want to say purchase order instead of just for the audience at home, whenever things pop up that are an acronym.
Oh, yes.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I apologize.
It's all good.
Purchase order.
Yeah.
So under 10,000 does not require purchase order. That would be a small dollar purchase, and that's just to create efficiency in those small dollar purchases. Level 2, as a result of the change, was increased. Level 2 will be from 10,000 to 30,000. This range does require a purchase order, and it requires 3 quotes. And the lowest quote would be awarded the work. Level 3 was also modified. Level 3 includes purchases from 30,000 up to 100,000, and these require informal or formal, depending on the complexity of the purchase. So this does require PO. This requires a city contract, and it requires city manager approval. Level 4 was changed. This is the level at which council approvals apply. This is now set to 100,000 from 75,000. So anything under 100,000 can be approved through department heads and or city manager. This does require a PO, a purchase order, and this does require a city contract as well. And this requires a formal solicitation. So this would require an IFB or an RFP, which is an invitation for bid or a request for proposal, depending on the purchase. And in addition to that, we changed petty cash threshold. It was 100, and now that's 200. And staff will be taking that policy on a separate date for approval.
So those are the basic thresholds for procurement. In addition, something that's new for the city of Laguna Beach is we are proposing that the city adopt the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. That is called CUPCA, and it's state contract, it's based on state contracting law. What it does is a state law provides if the city chooses to participate, is for public works projects, it allows some more flexibility in higher thresholds as far as competitive bidding and approvals. So if a project were a public works project, instead they'd have different thresholds beyond the previous slide. They would have just an informal quote process up to $220,000, and then a formal bidding process over $220,000. So what a public works contract isn't everything that public works does. It's specifically defined in the state law. So it's mostly related to construction, reconstruction, demolition, and painting of publicly owned, leased, or operated facilities. It does not include routine maintenance work like street reconstruction and minor repairs and landscaping. So that's what a public works project would be that would follow under these standards.
Thank you, Michelle. Moving on to the next slide.
Can I ask just a real quick question? There's the 220 out of the statute it's kind of a funny number.
Absolutely, it is.
And Madam Director, if I may, oftentimes the state does update that. And so our ordinance and policy are drafted to mirror that. So whenever the state modifies the dollar amounts, ours will automatically go.
Thank you. So continuing on, Michelle's going to cover the capital asset.
Oh, yes. The policy talks about capitalizing capital assets, increasing that from $5,000 to $10,000. The uniform guidance that administers all the federal grant requirements in the country increased this threshold back in October. So technically, when the finance department updated the policy that you approved last December, we should have bumped our threshold then. This is just a minor change, and we're going to bring that updated policy. Everything else is going to be the same, but we're going to update that threshold here in the procurement policy, and then again in the separate administrative policy that will be coming to you on your October 14th meeting.
Thank you. In addition to that, we named approval requirements for contract amendments. So if we have a contract in place and there's a need to increase a contract, we do give specific authorities for that. Department heads can approve increases for commodity and service contracts based on these particular percentages. In addition to that, administrative contract amendments, non-material updates can be approved by department head. And then the scope, if there's any change in the scope of a contract, this may require solicitation depending on the depth of the change, and a contract amendment and a required purchase order with department head and contract city manager approvals.
I want to make one comment. So if a contract gets amended, it increases the total value of that contract cumulatively to one of the levels of thresholds. So right now, even in the proposed policy, department head of threshold is up to $30,000. If there were an amendment, that would make that contract value above $30,000, but less than $100,000. That amendment would need the city manager's approval. Likewise, if there was an amendment that cumulatively increased the value of that contract above $100,000, that would need to come to city council for approval. So these thresholds are cumulative. It's, a department head like myself can't do a $30,000 per year contract each year and end up with a $100,000 contract without the city manager, or above that without the city council approval. I want to make that very
Michelle,
clear.
how do you track that? So let's say we've got a contract, it's approved, and we get a bunch of change orders. Who's responsible for making sure that we stay within the guidelines?
This is why the city council made that wise decision to add procurement officer as a position in our finance department. So that is what the procurement officer's responsibility is. And we do track those in our ERP system, all the contracts as well.
Thank you.
Is the cumulative total based on the original value of the contract, or is it calendar?
Absolutely. So if you start with 30,000, then you add another year, that's another 30,000. Now that's a $60,000 contract. Now that needs the city manager's approval.
Regardless if it goes beyond a year.
Exactly. It's the total years and what's that total value of that contract. And then based on that number, which level 1 through 4 does it follow under as far as approvals?
Michelle, what's the budgetary control on that? If everybody's increasing their contracts 20%, 20%, 20%, how do you maintain budgetary control?
Again, that's where the procurement officer is valuable because above the $10,000 purchase from, our proposed value from slide 3 is increasing a minor purchase where you don't need any solicitation or any purchase order is from 5,000 to 10,000. So anything over $10,000 has to go through the procurement officer, requires a city purchase order. So to get a city purchase order, you have to have the budget.
Oh, got it.
So we'll move on now to some of the additions covering contractor performance and contractor vetting. So we define the responsibilities of the departments. This is, already being done. We just made it very clear in case there was any ambiguity here, but departments must ensure contractors are in good standing and have required experience and/or licensing to perform the work. And they're also responsible to monitor the performance and immediately document and address performance deficiencies. In addition to that, we added a term to the policy called retroactive procurement. This is basically authorizing work without a contract in place. This is a violation of the policy, and we wanted to just call that out and make it clear to ensure compliance and to require approvals for those instances. When that does happen, we ask that departments enter a requisition and get approvals, even though it's after the fact, but just to ensure that they understand the policy and that there's corrective action that they've taken to avoid that from happening. We are also being more clear on our cooperative purchasing contracting. We define the clear requirements and benefits to a cooperative purchasing. This is when the city may save time and money by piggybacking on contracts that have already been solicited by other U.S. public agencies and procurement cooperative partnerships such as Omnia, NASPO, GSA, and Sourcewell. We do define the requirements for utilizing these type of contracts. However, we require that the competitive bidding source contract is active and the source contract contains cooperative language. So in other words, it allows for it. In addition to that, the awarded vendor must be the same vendor as the vendor providing the goods or service. No type of subcontracting or sourcing out. The scope of work must match what the city's contracting for. And the awarded vendor must extend the same terms and conditions to the city. In addition to that, these cooperatives sometimes come with different types of agreements, participating addendums and different things that they require the city to sign. So we would vet all this through our city attorney's office before executing any type of agreement to make sure that we're not in conflict to our city terms. And the benefits to using cooperative agreements. So reduction in administrative costs by limiting staff time to conduct public procurements and solicitations. We reduce lead times for procuring necessary commodities and services to meet critical operational needs. In addition to that, we get lower prices, volume discounts, better contract terms by pooling the demand with other public agencies. We have a greater degree of oversight and compliance for agencies and for contractors. We define on-call contracts. That is already being done here at the city, but we just made it very clear that these are options for departments. They just must follow the purchasing policy when establishing these contracts. In addition to that, City Council would approve maximum thresholds per task order. So currently, Public Works has on-call contracts, and that goes up to 75,000. So whatever that threshold will be, that City Council would be aware and be approving that in advance. And departments would be required to obtain 3 quotes from the list of on-call contractors so that they can ensure that they're getting the best pricing, even though these have been solicited, they're getting the best pricing from those on-call contractors, and they are, involving giving them opportunity to bid on the work. In addition to that, departments must monitor the performance of these on-call contractors and ensure that there's adherence to the scope of work, the pricing, and in that their insurance is active through the life of these contracts. We also make mention of the contract templates that have been recently created for the city. These have been created and approved by the city attorney's office. They contain all the required contract terms to protect the city, and they also are very clear on the insurance requirements for vendors. Any exceptions to these standards would be vetted through the city attorney's office. That would be reviewed and approved before we could, consider that. In addition to that, we clearly define the signature authorities on contracts. I think there was some confusion at times, who signs first, that sort of thing. So we defined that the vendors always sign first, then it comes to the city, and then we have thresholds for who signs that contract. In addition to that, we mentioned the fact that every city contract requires an agreement number that's going to be assigned by the city clerk's office. So we would, departments would need to ensure they're getting an agreement number assigned. And I just make mention in our policy of the new ERP systems contract module that went live on July 1st. So now we have a database where we are entering all the city contracts into that database. It's tracked, the not to exceed amounts are tracked, the expiration dates are tracked. So we're just letting departments know that now that contract has to come to procurement to have that entered into the ERP system. In addition to that, we mention contract terms. So sometimes some departments were doing a one-year term, some we're doing multi-year terms. So our recommendation in the policy is that if it's an ongoing service or commodity need, that there be a 3-year initial term with 2 one-year options to renew. This is going to benefit the city by getting locked in pricing for 3 years. It's a benefit to the vendor as well, right? They're guaranteed, work for the number of years. So the departments should seek approval. When they come to council for council-approved contracts, they should seek 2 actions. One is to get approval for the initial 3-year term, and the other is the authority to amend and renew for those 2 additional 1-year terms. So once that's done, those contracts shouldn't have to continually come back to council. All contracts should be resolicited after 5 years. And exceptions to the competitive purchasing requirements. So obviously, here's our policy, and then here's the exceptions. Here's the things that are just look a little different. So Public Works has the need for different supplies that are not readily obtainable through public solicitation process. These would include fuel, sand, rocks, lumber, mulch, trees. So our recommendation is that City Council approves the list of commodities, and the departments then would be required to obtain 3 quotes to ensure that the best price is obtained before proceeding. Other excluded purchases would be employee benefit payments, insurance policy premiums, the purchase or lease of real property, unilateral agreements such as postage, licenses, utilities, government fees, payment to other government agencies. Additional exceptions would be when the city receives federal, state, or county grant monies and we're considered a pass-through agency. In addition, payment to contract instructors. So when the city provides payment to contract instructors for recreational classes where the payment is based on participant registration, that would be another exception. And other things considered opportunity buys. So this is when you're going to obtain goods or service and it's the competitive market. There's better pricing and better value going outside of the competitive market. And this would be things like a public auction, a closeout sale, excuse me, bankruptcy, a trade-in or exchange. And that is my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. But I just want to make mention that the purchasing policy and the first reading of the ordinance to update the city's municipal code will be presented at the October 14th meeting. And if approved, the second reading of the ordinance will be completed at the October 28th meeting. Staff, I'm available to answer questions, and there's other members here that can answer questions as well.
Questions for staff?
I had one question, which maybe is a Megan question, and you might just have a sense of it, but there was a slide in here about, exceptions to our standard contract. Obviously, we prefer our standard contract whenever we can get it. Are there many exceptions, or do we hold pretty tight on this is our contract, take it or leave it kind of thing?
Councilmember, it kind of depends on, a lot of it has to do with the contract, the person we're contracting with. Some push back really hard, some don't. A good sort of exception to that rule is software contracts. Software companies often won't they use their form and they won't use our form and they won't negotiate on it. We have very little leverage to, like, for example, tell Microsoft to do something. So in those scenarios, we have to, otherwise, to the extent it's a negotiation, we advise as to the risks and, but we try to, as much as possible, hold to our contract.
And then I would just say in my short tenure here, in the contracts I've had to do, which is mostly for contracting and professional services, there might have been questions about the limits about the insurance policy. And in addition to the city attorney, we need to get the risk management manager to approve that because that involves risk management. Maybe you're going to have a consultant who's working remote. They're never coming to City Hall. Their firm doesn't want to have a $2 million automobile policy. And usually the city attorney is okay with that, and then we confirm that with risk management.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may just add, the approach that we have taken is kind of a, not carrot and stick, but we tell the vendor, hey, if you're good with our template agreement, which is of course as Pro City, that process is much smoother and quicker. They can start working, they can start getting paid sooner. If not, we don't purposely delay it, but of course it is a back and forth. As Madam City Attorney and Madam Director said, if it's a remote work saying, hey, I only have $1 million auto insurance, that's fine. If it's the change of venue, change of indemnification, the assertion that they get to choose who our counsel is, that's obviously a non-starter, and we're kind of in the thick of it.
And then I would just say now that we do have these approved templates by the city attorney's office, and I appreciate Patrick's efforts on that. One of the best practices, once the policy is formally approved and the ordinance is formally approved by the council, we'll be having a procurement one-on-one session with staff. And one of the best practices will be that the standard agreement, whether it's a construction project or professional services, is part of that RFP process, part of that solicitation process. And so when the prospective vendors respond, they have to state whether they take any exceptions to the city standard agreement. And I think the best practice would be staff to consider that in their scoring process. A vendor who has 0 exceptions to the standard contract versus one who does, I would expect that the vendor with 0 exceptions would score certain areas higher than others.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, because if somebody was $10,000 lower, but they have a bunch of exceptions like to insurance and indemnity, you're not going to, why would you take the $10,000 savings? So that's a good point.
But I guess alternatively, if like the exception was about, they're gonna have the person working from home, they don't need insurance related to a car, that I would hope would not be, factored against them.
Absolutely. That's why it would be like a best practice that staff could, have qualitative considerations for what those exceptions are.
Got it. Question. So, we have I spent some time, and I really appreciate the way it's a lot easier to look through the check warrants now. So I appreciate that. And one of the, so, I think procurement is such an opportunity to generate, there's a compliance side of it, right? Where we want to be, in the business of good government, have checks in place because, that's how we avoid issues and things that we don't want in terms of government accountability. But we also this is really the opportunity to drive a lot of cost savings, but also just achieve efficiencies and provide better services for our residents. So I saw that we have this Amazon marketplace portal on our contract later today, and that's through the city manager's office. And I imagine that's an example of where we're able to leverage economies of scale as the government, where we're buying a lot and get discounts, as I read that contract. Right. So is that
actually from finance? It's actually one of the projects Christina helped us as she was exiting as an employee and transitioning to contractor. But that was from one of the cooperative agreement advantages, where she saw that Amazon does have a cooperative agreement. It has government pricing for those who participate in it. And that is a great example.
So before that, every department had their own Amazon account potentially, and they were going and purchasing things. And so this is a great example of efficiency. So thank you for that. I noticed we have, and I don't know maybe there's a good reason for this, but we have check warrants to AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile.
Yes.
So is that another opportunity where we could potentially have, one phone company where we negotiate with them to get the best price, and then and there might be reasons why different service providers, maybe for a certain type of equipment. I don't know the answer to that, but are we looking at opportunities like that where it's services that every department uses, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be using our purchasing power to get the best deal.
Yes, I'm going to start the answer, then I'm going to hand it over to our former procurement officer. Overall, not off the top of my head, I would think that some of those services might be the actual city telephone versus mobile phones. So if it's a city telephone service, if it's AT&T, that's our phone provider, we're stuck with them. That might not be the answer for this. But even though we have a procurement officer, the city's purchasing is decentralized, so each department is responsible for their own procurement. The procurement officer is available to help them search for what cooperative purchasing arrangements are out there. Like, hey, we want to do citywide cell phones. Can you help us find? Does T-Mobile have a government contracting rate that's more competitive than Verizon? I know that they both do. So I put above my head, I don't know who's more competitive. But I'll just start with that we're still decentralized, even though we have in purchasing, even though we have a procurement officer. And then Christina, if you want to answer his specific question.
Yeah, sometimes it's a coverage issue. So you have multiple providers because of coverage issues in certain areas. There's people who have to take their phones home or have to respond after. And so that's.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I don't want to get, I'm not second guessing the decision to
Yeah.
have that. My question is more of a policy question about, and I think it's about decentralized versus centralized. I see the merits in, in having a centralized approach to ensuring that we are looking at that. Maybe we look at that and we say, okay, you know what, it makes sense to have 3 different, contracts, or they do different things. That's not for me to decide. I guess my policy question, maybe it's with the city manager involved, is can it be that the procurement officer is playing a more proactive role in saying, look, these different departments are doing this? Because we could find, generate 20% on there's a lot. And, Sue and I worked with former Supervisor Bartlett on this this company called Procure America. And I don't know what ended up happening with that, but they were looking at things. Their goal is to find cost savings. So I guess that's sort of my question could that be potential council direction to have a, a more proactive approach in how we're looking at these types of cost savings? Or I don't know, Dave, what do you think about that?
Yes. Short answer and long answer is yes.
Okay.
Well, in the private sector, we have a lot of enterprise contracts too. I mean, it's very typical that we negotiate enterprise contracts. Maybe we just look for opportunities. I understand in the city, we can't necessarily do that for everything, but where we can do, I think it'd be really
Exactly.
good. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to note what the mayor said about the new way of listing the warrants, because I know that I've heard from more than a couple of you that folks are reading this now, and that's a good thing because it raises issues whenever I get a chance to thumb through it too. What does this look like? And I think that's a natural avenue for finance and the city management team to see what can we improve there. So good change.
Okay. Further questions?
Yeah, quick question. On the slide that has the on-call contracts, the third box down, if you could help me understand, at the end of the sentence, it says award the work to the lowest qualified proposer.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say Public Works has on-call civil engineering services, and they have 5 vendors that are on this on-call list. And remember, in the presentation, Christina said that to get on that on-call list required an RFP process. So they already went through a competitive process of what their rates would be. Now we're in the contract term, and there's some special project that Public Works wants to get a civil engineer to help. They will give that scope of work to their civil engineers that are on this on-call list and get a price. And generally, because they're already on our on-call list, that means that their qualified professional services are agreeable to city staff. So generally, you would want that work order or task order, or whatever we call it out in the policy, to be awarded to the lowest priced person.
That answers my question. So they've been vetted.
They've been vetted to get on the list. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, let's open it up to the public.
Thank you very much. Actually, my main question was answered by Michelle. Thank you so much. I was just wondering what was going to happen with these single selections off of the on-call list. And I guess that's going to go away, right? We'll get at least 3 bids for every contract over the threshold, of course.
3 quotes.
3 quotes.
Yes.
Yes, 3 quotes. Okay. So that is absolutely great news. So those 2 contracts on August 27th, Dave, they would have gotten 3 quotes as opposed to just the 1. Or 3 quotes, yes, 3 quotes. as
That's
opposed-
right.
Okay, thank you. That is great news. thank you so much. I appreciate it. With respect to the exceptions in section 2.030050, I just wonder whether we could have just a little bit more flavor on those. For example, no competitive advantage. When the city manager or city council determines that no price advantage would be gained from a competitive solicitation price, you can have an exception. It just, I think maybe we could add some words as to how that would be determined and how it would be demonstrated. You know, for example, this or that or the other thing, so that we have a little bit more guidance than just, well, if they decide, then that's the decision. In B5, similarly, the vendor holds a unique set of skills or expertise that make it impossible or unlikely that anyone else can do the work or the same quality of work. Again, I think that's awfully broad, and maybe narrowing it down with a couple examples of when that would be appropriate would be helpful. And then in G, best interest of the city, I don't have a problem with that, but I just suggest that we're asking the justification to be in the file, but the city manager justify it in the file. I would suggest that those contracts over the threshold, that justification also be shared with the city council so they know. So those are my only comments on that. But then I did have something on, let's see, section 2.30080, B2 and 3, and G2. The amounts, the written amounts say one thing, and the amounts in the parentheses that are written in numbers say another thing. And yes, I do need a life. I definitely do. I used to tell people I was trained as an auditor. I think I was born one, you know, I can't help it. The one other question, I think I have some understanding, but maybe you can help me. Dave is the purchasing officer, and now I'm hearing about a procurement officer, so maybe you could tell me how those 2 work together? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start with answering those questions.
Yes, the type about the dollar amount, all of those questions relate to the purchasing ordinance. So staff will work with the city attorney's office to make sure that the clarifications we have in the policy are copied over to the ordinance. So there's consistency there. We did notice, we were hoping that she wouldn't read it because this was just a draft. Just kidding. The dollar amount typo, we did already communicate that, and that would be cleaned up on the 14th. As far as the purchasing officer being the city manager,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So the city manager is the purchasing officer in terms of implementing the purchasing ordinance. The procurement officer, as I understand it, that is just that's a very apt title. However, that could be really, any title in the finance department. That individual is really responsible for the kind of cataloging, maintenance, and kind of upkeep of the contract, such that if a contract has $80,000 on it and it's been drawn down over the fiscal year, the procurement officer is going to be the individual saying, hey, we only have $5,000 left on this contract. Public Works, City Attorney's Office, Finance Department, whatever department head it's relevant to, please be advised, such that you're, kind of running out of money on that.
unless the city council or the city manager want that section of the ordinance to be specified, to define who the purchasing officer is, whether that's the city manager and his or her designee, or the finance director and his or her designee, to make more clarity, because, the duties are not being done by the city manager. He's not reviewing the contracts and things like that. So if we're already updating the ordinance, we could have that clarity if that's what the council would like us to do to, address the public comment.
Bill's giving away all my secrets.
Okay, let's bring it back to the council for any further questions and comments. And the goal is high-level feedback. I guess maybe let me restate the question. Is there specific feedback that you are looking for? Is this study session, the goal is just to kind of educate us and move forward from there?
We especially were hoping you'd look at those limits, and with the way that Michelle and Christina presented them, make sure those are okay, because they are moving up a little bit. But if the comments you've made are all helpful so far, so we don't need any more direction.
So let's bring it back to the council. Hallie, you want to start? No?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Anyone else? No? So, oh, Sue?
Nope.
I'll just end with just some final thoughts on this, because I mean, I think we spend more than $20 million on contractual services, probably more than that, but in the budget it's 19.9 million, but then you have other things that are listed that are also would count as contractual. So I mean, the point is we spend a lot of money on our contracts, and I really appreciate that we are cleaning it up from a compliance standpoint as it relates to all this. But I want to make sure that we are, as we, you know, we ensure that we have good compliance protocols in place, that we're also just looking at how can we make things, how can we save money and also improve services. And I know, you know, I used to work at the county, and I remember it was a nightmare to try to do any sort of contract there. And that's not necessarily a good government thing when there's so many rules in place that it's like it's impossible to get a contract out. So let me ask a question. What is the timeline between when, let's say the council approves the contract tonight, how long does it typically take for that contract to get executed?
If the staff has followed the best practice where the vendor has signed the contract and there's a contract already attached to, you know, the staff report and the vendor's already signed it, it should be executed the very next day.
That's great.
So it should be very quick. And that is one of the reasons why the purchasing policy is a lot longer than our current one, because there's a lot more steps to hopefully give staff clarity on what to do. And that's why we have a lot of exceptions. We've provided the cooperative purchasing area and are recommending that council adopt the state contracting CUPCA standards. That gives staff flexibility to still work within standards and still give council comfort that we're following and getting the best price and service for the city and the residents, but giving staff a lot of different avenues or flexibility if they have a unique situation and need flexibility to get that goods and services done, and they're not stuck trying to figure out what to do to move forward.
And then now that we have that policy for digital signing, is DocuSign widely used now?
I'm not sure if it's fully implemented yet. I don't know if Megan or...
And so I can kind of speak to that, echoing the sentiment of Madam City Attorney. DocuSign had some concerns with our template contract. So
gosh.
the back and forth was a little bit lengthier than to be expected.
Okay.
However, you know, we were of the opinion that we got sufficient protection from them, actually via a cooperative purchasing.
Great.
And so that's kind of why it took a little bit longer. I believe the ball is in their court to just finalize one quick term, at which point the second that gets into our queue, I believe it could be coming for your signature, Mr. Mayor, or maybe Mr. City Manager.
Do I get to digitally sign it, or?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Because so going forward, we won't have to be mailing contracts back and forth. Okay, because okay, good. And then, you know, final question. Have we thought about looking at more innovative ways to do procurement? Because I think traditionally we look at it from a process standpoint as opposed to an outcome standpoint. So for example, instead of going out for a specific type of software, why don't we say what our solution is that we're trying to, you know, find as it relates to, you know, any number of issues, and then like do a request for interest or, you know, different requests for information. Are there other, is that part, will this allow for that, where we could just not just do the traditional, because sometimes you don't know what you want until you see what's out there, and that can actually lead to better outcomes for us and for our residents, where we're not, you know, contracting people for maybe the wrong thing because we just don't know any better.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And that is currently being done. There are departments who have conducted RFIs in the last 4 months that I've seen. So it's great because they're able to obtain the information for what the marketplace is proposing for solutions. And then it's very clear, though, that doesn't result in a contract, right? That's the beginning process. And then from there, they can evaluate and then move on to the next, if they're going to do an RFP or a bid.
Great. Okay. And then Dave, do we need to get direction about if there's support for a proactive approach for looking at efficiencies with procurement, or how would you want to effectuate something like that?
I always assume that there's always support for that, so I don't know that I need additional direction.
Can that be in our policy? Because I think that's something that's really like that can be as the objective of the policy potentially, and I don't know if that's.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sure. You mean like as a preamble?
Yeah, because I would think it would also help the person in that role to be able to go to different, because
Yeah.
there's probably pushback. And I mean, it just drives me crazy, the fact that we have all these fiefdoms that get in the way of efficiencies when, ultimately it's the residents' money that's at stake. So anything that we can do to enjoy the economies of scale that we have as a city, I hope we can do that.
Point well taken. We'll include that.
Great. Okay. Further comments? No? Okay. Thank you. Great presentation. Appreciate it. And great work. And thank you for the public input, Mary. We appreciate that.
Do we have to make fine? Do we have to do number 2, or are we just doing a
I,
receive?
I don't think so. It's just a receive
Okay, good.
file.
Okay. So then let's adjourn to our closed session at 4 o'clock. So we'll be back at 4 o'clock. Oh, we can go into closed session now?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
We-
but are we going to do a photo first?
We do have a quick detour. We want to take a photo with our electric vehicle fleet
So
in front of the police department here. So on the street here to
so
the,
can we go in,
and then we're going to closed session.
so but do we have to, can we go into closed session now and do that, or no, or that would be,
No, go ahead. So I think, Mayor, if you want to read us into closed session, and then we'll take a 3-minute recess in order to take the picture, and then we'll just go straight into conference room A.
so then let's adjourn to, let me get my notes. So do we need a roll call for that or no? So we'll adjourn to closed session. Megan, are there any items I have to read?
Yeah, so I think we'll take any public comment if there is any on closed session. Otherwise, we're going to go into closed session. And for the record, with respect to labor negotiations, Dave Kiff and Aggie Nesh are the designated representatives of the city. And with respect to the real property negotiations for item 6A, actually, for both items, Dave Kiff is the agency designated negotiator.
Thanks. Okay, we're adjourned to closed session.